The storm had rolled in without warning, turning the sky a heavy shade of gray as thunder cracked across the quiet neighborhood where Ethan lived alone with his 7-year-old son, Liam. They had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the kind of gentle ring neighbors gave, it was urgent, sharp, almost desperate. Ethan wiped his hands, confused, wondering who would visit this late. When he opened the door, he froze. 2 identical girls, no older than 8, stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, their long dark hair clinging to their faces. They looked pale, exhausted, and strangely calm, as if they had expected to be here. They said nothing, just stared at him with wide, gray eyes that made his stomach tighten. He asked them where their parents were, but they remained silent. One clutched a small backpack to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Liam peeked from behind Ethan's leg, whispering if they were lost. Ethan couldn't leave them outside in the freezing rain, so he stepped aside and let them in. The girls walked in quietly, dripping water onto the floor, moving in sync as though every gesture was practiced. Ethan tried again to get their names, and one of them finally whispered, "I'm Arya, this is Alina." Their voices were soft, almost too soft, like they hadn't spoken in days. Ethan brought towels and warm clothes Liam had outgrown, though he knew they wouldn't fit perfectly. The girls accepted them without complaint, but when he asked where they came from, they exchanged a look, a long, loaded look that made him feel like something was being said silently between them. The police station was closed due to the storm knocking down power lines, and the emergency dispatch said all units were occupied with flood calls. Ethan had no choice but to let them stay the night. He gave them Liam's room while Liam slept with him. But hours later, Ethan woke to a soft noise. When he walked down the hallway, he saw the twins sitting upright in the dark, holding hands, staring at the wall as if listening to something only they could hear. When he asked if they were okay, they nodded together, the same slow movement, still not smiling, still not explaining. There was something unsettling about how connected they were, how one moved exactly when the other moved. But they were just children, he reminded himself. Children alone in a storm. By morning, the storm had cleared, but the confusion in Ethan's home hadn't. He hoped that with daylight, the girls would be more willing to talk. He made breakfast and set plates for all of them. Liam was excited, asking them if they liked pancakes, trying to make them laugh, but they stayed quiet, though they watched him with curious eyes. It was only when Ethan gently asked again about their parents that Arya whispered that they couldn't go back. When he asked why, both girls lowered their heads and went silent, refusing to say another word. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. He didn't know if they were afraid, running, or hiding. He only knew they needed help. He decided to drive them to the station once the phones started working again, but as he grabbed his keys, he noticed the backpack the girls had guarded so carefully sitting unzipped on the couch. Inside wasn't clothes or toys, it was a stack of envelopes with timestamps, strange symbols, and one photo of the twins with a woman whose face had been violently scratched out. Beneath the picture was a note written in shaky handwriting, "If they find you, run. Don't trust anyone." Ethan felt his breath catch as he stared at the words. And when he looked up, the twins were standing behind him, watching, their pale faces unreadable. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he slipped the note back into the backpack. Trying to keep his expression neutral, the twins continued to watch him with an intensity that made him feel as if they could read every thought crossing his mind. He cleared his throat and gently asked who had written the warning. Arya's lips parted, but no sound came out. Alina looked at the floor, twisting her fingers together. It was the closest either of them had shown to fear. Ethan softened his tone, reminding himself they were children, not threats. But the truth lingered uncomfortably in the air. Someone dangerous was involved in their lives, and now that danger might be in his house. Liam ran into the room with his toy car, breaking the tension. The girls instantly straightened, wiping away the uneasiness on their faces, almost as if trained to hide emotion. Liam invited them to play, but they shook their heads politely. Ethan saw how they watched Liam's innocence like it was something foreign to them. Ethan gently took Liam aside, telling him the girls were tired and needed space. Liam obeyed without question, but not without glancing back at them curiously. When Ethan returned to the twins, he tried once more to coax an explanation, but they simply pressed their lips together and moved closer to each other, fingers interlocking tightly. He decided to call the police again, hoping the lines were restored. But the moment he picked up the phone, both girls flinched, holding onto each other as if bracing for something terrible. Their reaction was too extreme to ignore. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, realizing he might be triggering a memory he didn't understand. He assured them he only wanted to help, but Arya whispered that calling anyone would bring them here. Ethan didn't know who they were, but the dread in her eyes made his stomach twist. He put the phone down. A sudden knock on the door made all three children jump. Ethan instinctively motioned for silence. The girls went rigid, their faces draining of color. The person outside knocked again, harder this time. Ethan walked toward the door as quietly as possible and peeked through the peephole. A man stood there dressed in a faded security uniform, his eyes scanning the porch. He looked harmless enough, but something about the forced smile he wore sent a cold prickle down Ethan's spine. The man called out that he was checking on residents after the storm. Ethan didn't answer. The man knocked once more, waited, then walked away slowly, too slowly, as if expecting Ethan to open the door. When Ethan turned around, the twins were trembling. Alina whispered, "He's one of them," her voice shaking. Before he could ask how she knew, the girls rushed to Liam and pulled him close, telling him not to go near any windows. Ethan felt the situation slipping out of his control. The girls weren't just frightened children, they were hiding from something organized, something that sent people door to door pretending to be harmless. Ethan locked every door and window while the girls watched with quiet urgency, instructing him where locks were weak or blinds too thin. Their knowledge was unsettlingly precise. Hours passed with tense silence. Liam eventually fell asleep on the couch, unaware of the danger. As evening settled, Ethan sat across from the twins, demanding gently but firmly that they tell him the truth. For the first time, Arya didn't look away. She said they were not supposed to survive. They had been part of a program, a word she said with a shudder, where children were watched, monitored, and tested for something she couldn't fully explain, only that they knew things normal people didn't. The scratched-out woman in the picture had helped them escape, and the people running the program had been hunting them ever since. Ethan felt the room grow smaller as the implications settled in. They weren't just lost girls. They were fugitives from something darker than he'd imagined. And now, because he had opened his door to them, he was part of it too. Night settled heavily around the house, wrapping everything in a tense stillness that made every creak of wood and whisper of wind feel louder than it should have. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone outside was watching. The twins stayed close to each other, barely speaking, their eyes flicking to the windows every few minutes as if expecting shadows to appear. Ethan wanted to reassure them, but he didn't know how to protect children hunted by people powerful enough to pose as authorities. He kept checking the locked doors, the curtains, the backyard. Nothing looked unusual, yet the air held a pressure that warned him the quiet wouldn't last. The girls suddenly stiffened, their heads turning toward the hallway as though hearing something Ethan couldn't. He strained his ears but heard nothing. Arya whispered that someone had placed a tracker on the house. Ethan stared at her in disbelief, wondering if fear was making her imagine things, but the certainty in her voice was chilling. They described the sound, an almost inaudible frequency that only they could detect. The program, as they had called it, had done something to their senses, sharpening them beyond normal limits. Ethan knew he couldn't question them anymore, too many impossible things had already proven true. He grabbed a flashlight and told the girls to stay with Liam while he checked the perimeter. Arya shook her head violently, insisting he shouldn't go alone. But Ethan couldn't sit still knowing someone might be marking his home. He stepped into the cold night, every instinct screaming caution. The ground was still wet from the storm, making his footsteps muted. As he circled the house, his beam caught something metallic wedged beneath the gutter, a small device blinking faintly. His pulse spiked. Arya had been right. He yanked it down with trembling fingers and stuffed it into his pocket. When he re-entered the house, Arya and Alina flinched at the sight of the device. They recognized it immediately. They said that once the signal was activated, the hunters would come. Not tomorrow, not in hours, soon. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't have a plan. He had no weapons, no safe house, no allies. All he had were 3 children who trusted him and a danger approaching fast. He looked at the girls and asked the only question he hadn't dared until now: why were they chosen for the program? The twins exchanged a look that lasted too long, then whispered that they weren't chosen. They were made. Ethan didn't understand, but their trembling made it clear that explaining it would cost them more than they could give right now. Before Ethan could push further, the power suddenly cut out, plunging the house into darkness. Liam woke with a start and began crying softly, and Ethan grabbed him, whispering comfort. But his own heartbeat thundered in his ears. Arya and Alina stood motionless, their eyes wide, listening. They both looked toward the front door at the same time. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Someone was outside. A soft scrape of boots on concrete confirmed it. Then another. And another. More than one person. They weren't knocking this time. They were surrounding the house. Ethan moved the children toward the back of the house, but Arya grabbed his sleeve, insisting they needed to go down, not out. The basement. Ethan hesitated, but the sound of metal tools scraping against the front lock pushed him into action. They rushed downstairs as quietly as possible, closing the basement door behind them. The darkness was suffocating. Ethan's hands fumbled for the pull-string light, but Arya grabbed his wrist, shaking her head. Light would reveal them. They crouched behind old storage boxes as footsteps entered the house above, calm, controlled, as if the intruders knew exactly what they were doing. The floorboards creaked, slow and methodical, as if they were scanning each room. Liam buried his face in Ethan's chest, trembling. Arya leaned close to Ethan's ear and whispered the words he feared most. "If they find us, they won't let any of us leave."